Hi everyone, my name is Bijan from Product Management Exercises, and today I'm here with Chris from Seattle, who's recently joined Google Cloud, and he hasn't started yet, but he's one of the users of Product Management Exercises, and he was able to use the site to prepare for the PM interviews and land a job at Google Cloud. Today, we're going to do a product manager interview question, but first I'd like to invite Chris to introduce himself, and then we can get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Madison. I'm currently a senior PM, or have been a senior product manager at NGINX or F5 Networks. I recently joined Google, and I haven't actually started yet, but I have about 8 years of product management experience, a master's degree in information systems and business. And yeah, I think that's the quick highlights.
All right, well, thank you so much. So we'll get started. So the question that we're going to do today is, what is the North Star metric for Google Calendar?
Awesome. And I have a iPad here I'm kind of writing on. So if you see me kind of jotting notes down, I am working on the problem, not just doodling. Okay, so I like to kind of go with a structure that looks something like, whenever I try and think about North Star metric questions, I try to structure my answer in a way that is, I first ask some clarifying questions to make sure I understand the problem or the product in the scenario that we're trying to measure. And I usually like to do that by kind of maybe asking those questions, maybe discussing the business or mission of the product, talking through the user actions, and then kind of looking at a list of metric categories that are kind of like a go-to that, quite frankly, every PM should know intimately. And then within those, within that category, I like to choose a specific one and then kind of dive deeper and get to something more definitive and smart, if you will. So yeah, so that's kind of what my structure looks like at present. So first, I have some clarifying questions. We're talking about Google Calendar, and Google Calendar typically fits within the G Suite product, right? And I know as of late, I've kind of noticed Google pivoting more towards enterprises. So are we talking about North Star metrics for Google Calendar within G Suite, or just Google Calendar kind of as a whole, kind of setting the G Suite bit aside for now?
We can talk about Google Calendar as a whole and putting G Suite aside for now.
Okay, just GCal. Okay. So we're going to call this maybe we'll focus on the B2C market today. How about that? Okay. So those are kind of my two clarifying questions at present. I may have more, but we'll see if there's others that come up as we work through this. So yeah. So next, I want to talk about the business and mission of Google Calendar, because I think that's helpful. And I usually like to think about the vision, mission, and the product within the vein of the mission of the organization, which Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, right? And so when I apply that organizational mission to any product that I use by Google, I look at it through that lens. So let's talk about first Gmail. Like Gmail organizes communications, right? And then let's talk about Drive. Drive organizes digital assets, right? And files. And then if we think about Calendar organizes time, right? So if the mission of Google is to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible, the mission of Google Calendar might be to organize users' time or the world's time and make it universally accessible, right? So that's how I view the mission of Google Calendar. Does that make sense? And would you agree with that?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you're right that Google is really in the business of organizing world's information. And I like how you basically described what that means for Google Calendar.
Awesome. So let's talk about this for a moment. Yeah, so like now that we've like gotten past the mission and of of the product, uh, I kind of want to talk about the users and focus on what are the key actions that they're doing. Because ultimately, when I think about North Star metrics, I find that they're best, the most effective ones are rooted in actions that the user takes
Hmm.
that ultimately allows them to gain the most value from the product, right?
Yeah.
So uh, when I think about these user actions, I probably would say the thing that kind of jumps out at me is like creating invites.
Okay.
And invites can be with uh, one to many participants, including just yourself, right? Um, and then I would say uh, attending is another one that I like to use, and also attending invites, and then maybe like probably accepting invites, right? So if the goal of the product is to make uh, make time universally accessible for our users, helping them create invites and invite to invite others, um, kind of gauging the whether or not people are accepting those invites, and then kind of gauging whether the meeting actually happens. I think really the true measure of success is if our users are doing the thing that they said they would be doing at that time, right?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different ways we could measure this, uh, or we could kind of go about approaching that. But for now, let's kind of move on to. We'll actually pause there to see if those kind of make sense as key user actions, and if there's any others that you'd like me to consider.
No,
I,
I think it's fine. I think the user actions that you came up with make sense. So feel free to continue.
yeah, and there's definitely others. Like we could look at times you move a calendar event
Mm.
that shows usage, times you read or open a calendar event that shows intent to take action on it in some way, shape, or form.
Mm.
But I think ultimately adding more to the product versus just reading something that's already there is probably going to be more indicative of health of the product or success. So, and actually, let me just make sure, is this the North Star metric for Google Calendar or is this success?
It's a North Star metric.
North Star metric. Okay, perfect. Um, so yeah, of those three, I'm not going to choose a user action to focus on. Let's actually talk about some metric categories that we could go down to kind of see if it makes sense for us to choose one or the other of these user actions as a point of focus. So typically with metric categories, um, we have uh, we have a couple. Adoption, right? Are people adopting it? Two, engagement. Are people engaging with your product? Three, the people that have engaged previously or adopted, are they being retained? So retention. Um, there's also conversion, which I think maybe doesn't apply in this scenario, specifically since it's a free product. But also, I think about like revenue is like another one that I kind of look at. There's also like happiness and some other ones, like task success that you can look at. Um, and but I think the for this for Google Calendar, the kind of outside of the key metrics that I would use to track health, right? It's a well-established product, and I think just to be clear, I think G Suite as a like Gmail has like 1.5 billion active or accounts. And by virtue of that, I think you get calendar when you sign up for Gmail as well.
Mhm.
So you could potentially say there's 1.5 billion users, calendar users. Maybe 10% of those are are active. Just a high level off the top of my head, I kind of guesstimate there. So maybe there's like, let's call it 100, maybe 150 million users, maybe daily active or monthly active, something of that nature. Let's go with monthly active for the 100 million. And that's just to kind of like think about it. It's like, well, if we have 100 million active users, 1.5 billion accounts, I can probably, adoption isn't really the problem that we're trying to solve here, right? I don't think, right? So I'm going to go ahead and strike off adoption number one from the list. If I were in a B2B scenario, and I want to pause here and talk about this, I think it's really important. If we're looking at this through a B2B lens, meaning we're including G Suite, I'd probably want to focus my time on tracking enterprise adoption, because ultimately paid accounts or growth rate within enterprises is going to be probably one of the most important metrics. So so I want to say that, like, huge caveat around me striking out adoption, but let's go ahead and strike it out for now for B2C. Would you agree with that?
So can you just quickly give me a summary? So you said that you think adoption right now is not the main, it's not so important because about 10% you think of like Gmail users have already adopted it. Did I understand you right?
I think you get Calendar with Gmail, if I recall correctly. So you sign up for a Google account, you kind of get all of it. So just by virtue of people signing up for Calendar, they're kind of signing up for Gmail. They're kind of signing up for Calendar. So there's potentially already 1.5 billion accounts that exist in the world for Google Gmail and Google Calendar, because they're kind of one package, right? And then of those, maybe 10% of those 1.5 billion users are maybe monthly active users. So maybe 100 million to 150 million monthly active users for Calendar, which is still a really healthy number. So gaining more users at this point isn't, for a product like Calendar, doesn't seem like it is the thing that you like hang your hat on. It's like, yeah, we gained like another 0.1% of users. It's like, that's great. Let's, what else can we do to track the true success and health, right? If I was gonna look at a growth, I'd be looking more so at churn or retention or something like that. Are we losing users at this point, since we already have such a high number?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I strike the adoption off the list. Engagement is interesting. That's number 2 on the list. And I have about 6 of them here, so I'm going to get through these pretty quickly. Engagement, I'm not going to strike it off because I think it's useful, and we'll come back to that one. Retention, I think, is useful, so I'm not going to strike it off. Conversion as a metric category, I think I can strike off conversion, because you're not really converting from like a non-paid user to a paid user in Calendar. You may potentially convert from like a light user of Calendar to a power user, which we could look at it through that lens as well. And I think there's probably something we could do there, but for now I'm going to kind of set it aside. So I think it's interesting, but maybe not the most important metric of like the North Star, or like the health. Revenue is an interesting one because it's a free product. So I think looking at revenue as your North Star metric is maybe not the best approach. And I don't even think there's ads within Calendar either. So I don't think that's going to be something that we look at on a day-to-day basis. Task success, I'd say, is normally really important. If your product is new and you're just kind of just starting out, but Google Calendar is well established. And I can't remember the last time I was unable to create a calendar event or invite someone. It kind of nails the basics really, really well. So task success at this point maybe isn't a North Star metric that I'm looking at. So then, of the remaining list, there's kind of engagement and retention. When I think about other calendar tools out there, there's other ones that exist, like, ooh, interesting. Sorry, I just had a thought, and I'll come back to it. There's other calendars that exist, but I don't really see like users using a different calendar other than Google Calendar, if they're really heavily invested in one, other than maybe the one that comes native on their phone. So that's actually, sorry, I just like kind of had this inspirational thought, which is like, well, maybe like, yeah, because like if you have an iPhone, you may just use the Apple calendar, right? So maybe the North Star metric, or the way I'm looking at health, is the number of people that have calendar on their phone, versus or have downloaded the mobile app, something like that. Just I, it just was a bit of inspiration, so I kind of want to just jot it down here as a potential user action, which is like application downloads.
Okay.
And I think this one's interesting, but it kind of it's only one platform, so I think that's a kind of a limiting factor of why I would probably not choose it as a North Star metric. But I think at this point, if you're using, if we talk about this could kind of fall into the conversion bucket, which is like converting people from using Apple Calendar to Google Calendar would be a potential success metric. But again, if you're successful at that, it's kind of short-lived. So I kind of don't like using that one either. So even though it kind of came to me as a thing, I'm gonna go ahead and strike off the list as North Star. Engagement and retention. Retention, I don't think people are leaving Google Calendar. I don't think retention is a problem. So that's not really something that I'm gonna look at in deep detail as my North Star. And I kind of want to caveat this is like, even though I've kind of whittled everything down to engagement, right? That's the final metric category. And then we'll dive into a deeper, like a very specific engagement metric that we can track, and that is tied to, that we're going to basically put up on a dashboard in the engineering room. Like when this number goes up, we're doing well. When it goes down, we're doing bad, right? That's like our goal with these North Star metrics. As a product manager, I have to like caveat this. We are going to be looking at all of these things, right? Truly, if you're a great product manager, you're looking at adoption, you're looking at engagement, retention, conversion, revenue, and task success. And happiness, right? You're looking at the whole gamut. But if we're trying to get to like just the one thing that you like that is going to drive the team to do like to make the experience better, I think it's going to be engagement. And so engagement is typically rooted in user actions. So I'm gonna go ahead and star engagement. And let me just pause there before I move further to see if you would like to go down a different path, because if you want to choose retention or conversion, we can also do those, but I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to chime in here.
Yeah, I think it's good to pick engagement. I think that it's a very meaningful area to basically focus on. So let's continue with engagement, and yeah, let's go down.
Awesome. Yeah, let's go down that path. So then we have like other three user actions that we kind of mentioned before. There's creating invites, accepting invites, and attending invites. So of like if I had to choose one of these to kind of structure my metric, my key or North Star metric around, accepting invites is interesting. I think because the goal is to get people to come together, right? To make that time accessible. And a measure of accessibility is whether or not it's actually being used to have meetings with more than one, or have invites with more than one person, right? Is what I think when I think about accessibility in this sense, not like the user experience accessibility term that is often used for designing experiences for folks that may have a disability. So I kind of want to, so part of me is leaning towards accepting. The other part is I could make a case for creating. And I think creating is good because you're basically starting, it's like the bare minimum of like, no matter you're basically capturing folks that have created invites for themselves, just because like I often create calendar events where there's no invitees, right? Or no other attendees, just myself for like cooking dinner or cleaning the kitchen. And then there's other ones that I create, like going to dinner with friends in a pre-COVID. um, so yeah, so if you go with just creating invites, then you capture kind of both of those scenarios. If you go with accepting, then you're not really capturing, you're kind of missing out on the ones I create for just myself.
Yeah.
Unless we look at accepting invites as invite, because I think you automatically accept an invite if you're the organizer. So potentially we could use a workaround for that with accepting. But let's talk about attending first. I just want to like get my thoughts out there just to show you kind of how I'm thinking and approaching the problem. And then we'll kind of dive into one. So let's talk about attending invites. So attending invites is really the core piece of the platform, right? Is like if you got two people to meet, virtually via the phone or in person, that is true success, because for achieving the mission of organizing people's users' times and making it universally accessible, because it's organized. They're organized enough to find a slot to agree to meet, and then they actually meet. Right? That's they come together. I think that's the one that I would really love to be able to measure. But while that may be the North Star metric that I like to choose, if I went to my engineering team and said, hey, I want to measure when two people are in a space and whether or not their calendar event says that they should be doing this thing and where they are, they might pose some challenges there, right, to work through from a feasibility perspective. So even though I might really like attending, the feasibility we may not be able to get there just yet. So I think ultimately that's where I'd like to go. To see if is the user said they were going to cook dinner, are they actually cooking dinner at this time? That's like the true measure of success for the product. The user said they were going to be at the coffee shop meeting, Roger at this time. Are they actually meeting Roger at this coffee shop at this time? Mm. But again, feasibility, privacy, so many concerns around tracking that, right? So I want to be conscientious about our users. So maybe we'll start off with something a little lighter, with maybe just accepting invites. And I'm going to go with accepting because number of invites that have been accepted, because it's when the user is, if they create an invite for themselves, we'll assume that they've accepted it because they wouldn't have created it, right? And then we'll look at the number of, and then also we'll capture scenarios where the user has invited someone else and they both accept, right? And I think if I had to weed out invites, like if I had to say, okay, well, what does a non-acceptance look like? It looks like when more than 50% of the required participants decline, potentially, right? Is maybe a decent measure. So if you invite 4 people and they're all required, and then you invite 3 people, including yourself, in the meeting, 2 decline and 1 says, yeah, I'm willing to show up, then I think we potentially count that as either success or failure. So I would probably call that potentially a failure if you had half of the people that are required to be in the meeting actually aren't attending. But if those other 2 people were optional and that 1 person who accepted was required, then I'd say probably that is accepted. That's probably like a good scenario, because you're getting most of the people that you need to have that meeting. And also there's some challenges with this, because not everyone uses the optional field as intended, or as optional means a lot of different things to folks, depending on what company you work in, whether it's more of an FYI versus hey, I'm gonna be here, it'd be great if you could make it, and making them required to entice them to come versus actually expecting them to come. There's all kinds of ways you can use that field. So so now that I've kind of talked through my thought process about the user actions, I kind of want to dive into a very specific metric Does that kind of make sense? And do you kind of agree with this, with going down the path of accepting invites as our primary uh, user action?
Yeah, that works.
So as we're kind of wrapping up, if accepting invites is primary, um, our primary North Star, or our primary user action, and engagement is our primary metric category, it's I would probably say that the specific North Star metric that I would use would be it's probably like twofold. It's like number of accepted invites, maybe over time. So like I want to say like maybe per month or per quarter is I might be looking at this. And then you could even go with on a weekly basis as well. I think weekly is a little more challenging because you may get some variability week to week, and that may cause some like some potential alarms to go off unnecessarily. But if you go on the larger time scale on a month, if there is a problem with invites dropping off, you're not going to really get that signal. You're basically getting you're coming late to the game, so there's a month delay, and you're actually getting warned of a potential issue. So I might look at kind of weekly, monthly, and quarterly on a dashboard or something like that, just to make sure I'm thinking about this in a holistic way. And if there are any issues, I can quickly troubleshoot them and resolve them. So then the next one, and so then like getting the number of accepted invites is great, on a per month, per quarter, per week basis. I also want to look at the growth of those. Looking at the year-over-year growth of those accepted invites, I think would be really valuable. Yeah, and those are the two that kind of jump out at me as the North Star metrics that I would like track for if I chose engagement as my primary metric category, and if I chose accepting invites as my primary user action to orient my engagement in. Does that kind of make sense? And let me pause here to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and this totally could have gone any way, to be honest, which is one of the great things about interviewing, is we could go down any one of these rabbit holes and arrive at a similarly interesting and complex answer. But yeah, so thank you for doing this. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I really liked your answer. I think your answer was like really well structured. You started off with a really good clarification question, which was, is this B2C or B2B? And that makes a lot of difference. I think that was a really good question. And you tied Google Calendar really well to Google's mission and their core competency, which is ability to organize information. I think that was really good. Then you talked about the stories. You looked at the metric categories. You explained why some categories don't make sense and why some makes more sense, and then you prioritize them. I think you explained really well why some metrics such as happiness and revenue are not a priority here, and like what's the thinking behind prioritizing engagement. And then you went down the path of like really breaking down the engagement metrics in terms of like user actions such as creating invites, attending them, and accepting, and then really explaining your thinking behind why, in your opinion, accepting matters more than creating invite and attending as a metric for now. I think it was really well structured. To be honest, I think the answer was great. Couple small tweaks and feedbacks that I would have is potentially when you talked about adoption, I think there are different ways to define adoption. I think one question is, does signing up for Gmail basically suffice in terms of like saying that somebody is now a Google Calendar user or adopted user? And maybe definition of adoption is like you have to have visited Google Calendar at least once, or you have to have created at least one event or accepted one. Maybe that gets too close to the activation part, but I think there is argument to be made that adoption can be improved, even though there's a large number of people that are using Gmail. I think an example is like my father uses Gmail, but I don't think he's ever used Google Calendar.
Yeah.
So that's I think one interesting area that I kind of noticed. I think the other part was really interesting how you explained why accepting is really important. And I think one argument that maybe could be made about why creating invite is also important is creating invite can also enable attending and accepting and potentially drive those metrics as well. But I think your argument was very sound on why accepting is important. And maybe if you basically have a very good acceptance number, then you go and actually optimize for creation and like drive creation, because now you know that everybody who creates will have a good experience because people are accepting it, and basically the product is built in a way that has a high acceptance rate.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the answer. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure the PME community really appreciates the mock interview, and good job with your new job at Google Cloud.
Thank you, and love the feedback. Got to say, I love your approach to talking about adoption, because I think that is one that is really important. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And for everybody who's watching, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website at productmanagementexercises.com if you're preparing for a PM job interview at any of the tech companies around the world. Thank you and have a good day.
Bye.